Hey, I'm Tom from Mystery Game Fight Club, and we recently wrapped onto the Louisville Arcade Expo. Each year, the general public has a chance to experience what we do year-round, and we get a lot of questions about our setup or some specifics about the tournaments. Helping me today is our TO Roy, whose expertise in brackets and herding cats, in other words, half-drunk competitors, has been indispensable during our events. How are we doing today, Roy?
Thanks, Tom. I'm doing pretty well. Expo's been wrapped for a little over a week now. I've gotten plenty of sleep, trying to recuperate and stuff. And, I think it's the same with every expo. You need almost like a full week afterwards for everything to kind of digest. But now, that we've gotten some time to go over everything and talk about the best parts. It was great to see a lot of the people who showed up last year, this year, and people who even showed up the year before that. It's interesting. Feels good to have. Yeah, I was gonna say, feels good to have real fans.
Yeah, man, it is interesting, right? Because we have our regulars that we see all the time, and then we have our expo crowd, and then we have a separate YouTube following. So we have all these diverse followings. It's just really interesting to see.
It's awesome. It's awesome watching it grow.
Well, if you're ready, let's go through these questions.
Sure. So, one of the questions I think I get most often at the tournaments is, what is the software that we are using and how it all looks so well put together and pretty?
Yeah, that is a software called Launchbox, and we use a Windows PC for all of this. I paid for the premium version that we call Big Box, which is this really pretty looking full screen interface. Launchbox makes my life as the guy running the tech so much easier. The long and short of it is it's a glorified shortcut launcher. During the import process, you tell it which platform the game is from and which emulator you would want to use, if any. There's a bunch of optional stuff you can add later to make it nicer, like box art, marquees, or gameplay videos. From there, it's just a matter of organizing each of the titles into playlists, like fighting games or racing games, for example.
That blows my mind, honestly, how somebody thought, I'm going to make this super special shortcut program because, maybe just in the off chance there's somebody out there who wants to create the coolest fucking thing in the world. Where can users download Launchbox, Tom?
You can find Launchbox at launchbox-app.com. Big Box is an optional cost, but that license is DRM free, by the way, so you can transfer your license between machines without a lot of fuss. But if you can't afford that right away, that license does go on sale on occasions.
What would you say it is? If I could ask and pick your brain for just a second, there's always these little hints at the bottom of each shortcut, when you're seeing those controls right before, the game starts up. What is it that determines how you write out those hints? Is it something that you're inspired to write on your own? Is it something that you're pulling from the manual of the game? Random fan pages? What is it?
Sometimes I do look at the manuals just because I'm digging in there for the controls anyway. But sometimes I go through some of the hints that I find online or some things that I noticed when I was testing on my own. Just anything that looks like would be helpful inside of the few seconds that players have to look at these controls before we get started.
I'll tell you, half the time when I'm doing a tournament, man, and I'm in the tournament, I'll be looking at those controls, and I'm not sure what I should pay attention to more. The little love notes at the bottom or how to play the actual game. Because sometimes I find myself so mixed up in trying to remember where's high punch, where's low punch. And then I remember, oh yeah, if I press everything together at the same time, then I'll do a soup. And then, glory happens.
And then it's gone, right? Because now you're focused on the match.
Right. It's I have ADHD, you know what I'm saying? So when I walk into a room, I will forget everything in the room before me. And sometimes the same happens with those control screens, but I think it kind of adds to the magic.
A little bit. It's a lot better than it used to be, where I was literally shouting controls at people before the match, or even before that, where like I didn't document controls at all. I was just like, figure it out, man. And that wasn't working either. It's still a work in progress, but I think there's a limit to what I can do.
That's fair. I mean, you can't set everybody up for perfection with stuff like that, and that's part of the mystery element is, sometimes you got to find the cheese, you can't just tell you where it is.
Yeah.
So what are the specs on the PC we're running? Probably the second most asked question at the expo when somebody runs by and they see the projector, and I point behind the table and I say, there's the wizard. You got to talk to him.
Yeah. Right now we're on a Ryzen 3900X, 64 gigs of RAM, and an NVIDIA 3080. All the games for Mystery Game Fight Club are stored on a 4 terabyte solid state drive, which is getting pretty full. You wouldn't think it would, but it is.
We're out here, we're lugging around a full ATX tower set up on wheels. We've got fight sticks, game pads. Tom brings a trackball mouse. You name it. You think we'll ever see something with a handle on it? Maybe a micro build, Tom?
When we started, we were running this thing on a Raspberry Pi. So it actually was
back in the beginning.
It was just a little box, but with, we wanted to get more modern games. So the natural evolution meant that we needed a full PC setup. Now, I do try to make it as small as I can, but small is still like a shoebox. So it's kind of big, but it's not as big as it could be.
It's a boot box.
It's a boot box.
Maybe a little bigger than shoes.
It's a boot box.
So, how do you test all the games? How do you make sure that everything is unlocked before people get into the game?
So when I'm testing out games, I'm trying to answer a few questions. First of all, does it fit within our format at all? For fighting games, it's pretty cut and dry, but many other genres need a closer look. Just because it has local multiplayer doesn't necessarily mean it's a good fit, right? We don't have time for a full-length RTS match. Second, do the controls make any sense? With arcade games especially, I have to be very careful about where the buttons are mapped. The 6-button fighters especially need a fair amount of investigation. Lastly, what are the rules? Now this is the tricky part because I'm testing 2-player games by myself. Sometimes what makes sense to me in isolation doesn't really play out in a live setting, and adjustments need to be made going forward, or scrapped entirely on rare occasions. Now when it comes to unlocks, I do try to make sure everything is unlocked where I can, but it's not always feasible. Modern games with their DLC and season passes can make things real expensive real quick. So I usually wait for sales and deep discounts. On the emulation side, I have to finagle with importing save games from the internet or using cheats to unlock things. But even this process is not bulletproof. Sometimes I just have to play the games myself to unlock fighters and racetracks and extra game modes, what have you. Which, by the way, if anyone wants to help me with this, I do list which games need unlocks in our Discord server, which will be listed in the description below.
Do you think that when you're playing these games and when you're doing these unlocks, that you're ever going to find a new favorite game?
They surprise you. I had no idea I was going to like these wacky robo fighters. Like there's one in PlayStation 2 that's Japan exclusive. And I got into it and I was like, man, this is actually kind of cool. The Oscar 120% series, another Japan mostly exclusive.
Blitz Tank.
Right?
That game, I did not, like, title alone, I would have not expected the hype that, like, we got when that game came up the first time, and when somebody picked the tank, and then when there was the comeback against the tank, it just...
Oh, you're thinking...
I've definitely seen a lot of games, like Rumblefish, I think is a good example. Like,
yeah.
I still don't even really know how to play that game well, but I see the characters and the art style, and I'm just, like, charmed. I love thinking about new games, different ways, to play them and everything else. But with all that, you have to set up for every new game. And that's got to take so much work.
Yeah.
How many hours do you think you spent on that? Just setting up and tweaking and making sure that things launch right. How long do you think that's taken you?
I have no idea. I have no clue. If I had to put a number on it, I just can't. I have no idea. There's so much. But I guess a good way to kind of gauge is like when I do need to transfer to a new system. Because unfortunately, when you put these lists into a new machine, you have to start over. There's just no way around it. So to do that again usually takes about 2 weeks of free time. And that number is growing as the tournaments are growing. But once it's done, it's done. And adding new titles is a lot less of a pain after that. Until, of course...
I love how you say that with a little pause.
Yeah. Once it's done, it's done. But God.
The work.
It's so much.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think anybody ever shows up with their own controller, and I imagine that'd be a nightmare. It's a term that I like to use called mystery technical difficulty when a game just won't launch, but
yeah,
I can imagine if we had custom controllers going, it'd be a bit of a storm to get through.
It would be.
How do you think we should handle that with people? Where do we draw the line on controllers and jank and setup? Where are you like, I'm not doing this?
Controllers is definitely one. Because, hypothetically, if someone wanted to bring in their own controller, if it supports X input, then it should be fine. But, the second...
You think, if somebody brought their own controller that, they know that it supports X input, right? You'd think.
Maybe. But, the second somebody rolls up with, a PS5 controller, it's all over. The maps will not transfer to, direct input. That's not happening. So, rather than add that layer of complexity, it's just safer and more consistent to say that controllers are provided, and that's that.
That's good. It's good to, have a line somewhere, I suppose. So are the games at every match, are they random? Or do you cheese it a little bit?
The random pulls, they actually are random. Most of the time. There are occasions where I will spin again, just for the sake of diversity or entertainment value. Some franchises have a ton of games, like, King of Fighters or Street Fighter. We make sure that we only play one game in a series per tournament. So if King of Fighters comes up again, we will spin. Grand Finals games are another place where I might spin several times before we land on what we actually play. The Grand Finals ought to be a really hype experience, so I do try to make sure that the last game of the event is as much fun to watch as it is to play. Or sometimes the reverse. We do love our jank, so sometimes the janky games are good Grand Finals games. The
janky games are the best games.
They could be a lot of fun too.
And speaking of weird jank games, man, like we had to do caveman games at LAX. And every time that game comes out, I find myself thinking, how did Tom find this part of this game and determine, you know what, man, this belongs in fighting games?
There is stuff like that on occasion. Caveman games was a childhood find, actually. If that were not the case, I don't think it would have ever made it to the tournament. But one of my friends had that game growing up, and we laughed and had so much fun with it. Or we're frustrated by it because, yeah, some of the events in there are pretty awful. I eventually got the game myself, and it's always had a place in my heart, man. Love clubbing.
Oh man, clubbing's so good. I was watching a clip the other day on trying to make a fire. I saw the one where you do like the wife toss.
Yeah, the mate toss. It's so good.
Yeah. You think it'll ever be due for a re-release?
No.
Maybe a remaster?
No. We're lucky it came off of MS-DOS, bro.
Are there any other games in the catalog you think that are less, more or less like caveman games where, it's not necessarily a fighting game, but you go into a specific part of the game and bam, there's this little tiny fighting game component?
Buck Up and Drive comes to mind. It's kind of like an infinite runner style of driving game. Kind of looks a little bit like Outrun. But it's also got a 1v1 fighting game portion of it for reasons. I don't know. It makes zero sense when you're looking at it, but I don't think it was ever meant to. I think the dev just kind of threw it in because it looked funny. I guess Guardian Heroes on Saturn and Xbox Live Arcade. That also has a 1v1 fighting mode, but that's already a beat 'em up, so I guess it's not that strange. At least you have that.
So, caveman games is pretty rare. Like, I spent some time thinking about this, and I was like, the only game that I can, think of off the top of my head would be, I used to play a lot of, Kirby games back in the day.
Sure.
And my brother and I had Kirby Superstar. And we very rarely actually played, the game. We would open it up, and then we would go down into the bottom right of that menu, and we would be playing Samurai Kirby for hours. I can still hear it in my mind. Doo-doo-doo!
That's good stuff.
Yeah,
the quick
but that's
draw?
one where, if I would have never played those mini games or actually explored, the different modes in some of these, I would have never known that these things existed.
Sure.
So the other half of our setup at the expo that we also got a lot of questions about was our Primal Rage setup. I gotta ask the question everybody else is asking, Tom. Why Primal Rage?
Primal Rage is the game that taught me fighting games.
What a game to cut your teeth on.
Yeah. Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter. No. Primal Rage, bro. I learned a lot from playing Primal Rage, actually, you learn a lot about just neutral, movement, normal moves. And then once you get used to that, you can get into the combo system a little bit where you chain those normal attacks together and then finally end those combos with specials. Now, today, modern games go through that process a bit more streamlined. But, even for a 30-year-old fighting game, Primal Rage flows pretty well. Maybe what I like most about Primal Rage is how different it was. In a whole bunch of games that imitate each other from that era, and sentences that start it's Mortal Kombat, but, Primal Rage set itself apart with an alternate input scheme, a unique presentation with the claymation fighters and the UI. and rewarding players who really dig deep into the systems. You can pull off some crazy stuff.
As I've seen on your other YouTube videos, I remember you working on it for a long time to, what was it? You completed very hard mode, no damage?
Yeah, I did. I did do that. I think I'm the only idiot to devote that kind of time to do that. Yeah!
It's got to be a record. It's got to be a record somewhere.
No one's keeping track. Because why would you? Like, there are speed runs, there's, high score runs, but no one is keeping track of who could beat the game without damage. That's insane.
Right. That's like some, it's like something you'd see in GDQ. You know what I mean? And another thing that I think amazes me is, like, how diverse and how unique some of these games can be in terms of mechanics. Primal Rage with its neutral edge system, we've got other games like Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, where it seems like a normal fighting game, and then all of a sudden you're
until it's
doing
not.
all these different right. And then you've got easy games like Needhog, Dive Kick, where it's like, okay, you got two moves. You can run, you can throw, you can jump, you can kick. Easy.
Right.
So, I don't know. I think it's really interesting that with all these different mechanics, there's still nothing that has copied the neutral edge system.
Yeah.
As far as I know.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Level edge is pretty rare in fighting games.
Level edge, that's what it's called.
Yeah, level edge. There's an alternate universe out there where Capcom didn't dominate the fighting game market, and level edge is what we would be using today.
What a world it would be.
It would be very different. It would be very different. Yeah, something I really, really miss from the arcade era is just ideas. We used to have quite a lot of them. So I'm quite happy to keep those ideas alive in whatever ways that I can.
So, Tom, people have asked a lot about your Primal Rage arcade board, and specifically how you have it running on a normal TV. One of my favorite things to do when someone asks, so what's going on here? And I pull up the tablecloth a little bit and I say, that's what's going on in here. And they go, what's that? And I go, I don't know. So how does it all work, Tom? We got to know.
It's a pretty cool thing, man, but it's also a deep rabbit hole. But I'll try to keep it short. So when you run an arcade PCB outside of a cabinet, you still need all the things, right? You still need the power supply, monitor, speakers, and all that. So to do that, you need a device called a super gun. I have no idea why it's called that. But anyway, super guns are usually these handmade hobbyist products. You're not going to find them on Amazon. That's just not a thing. Super guns give you the ability to hook up everything you need, but without all of the messy wiring inside of a cabinet. Now you get to have all the messy wiring outside of a cabinet. The audio and video can be handled by a variety of analog outputs like component, the Euro, SCART connector, or even VGA on occasions. But if you want to use something modern like HDMI, that's a whole other discussion about upscaling products that will take that analog signal and convert it for you. The controls, similarly, are also analog, and that will need to be converted if you want to use a modern USB fight stick or gamepad.
That's a lot of conversion.
It is.
One thing I thought was especially interesting was at the very beginning of the expo, we were offered a CRT TV to try out. And that was a great learning experience in terms of how to carry video because we hooked it up and we got a black screen.
Nothing happened.
And, right, nothing happened. We still had audio, everything's still working, and we're going, what, why? And it turned out, we tried different AV cables. I'm calling places for a Sega Genesis Model 2 cable. And it ended up coming down to we need a CRT TV that has component hookups, the red, blue, and green one or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, I looked it up after the expo, and yeah, it comes down to we need a TV that can accept RGB, period. So composite's not going to work without another converter.
Right. Or, buying a $700 200-pound PVM, or, finding that perfect garage sale find.
Yeah, for real.
And another, I think, great point to make is what we have going with the mystery fighting game tournaments. We have the fight sticks, we have the game pads, but if you're looking for an authentic experience, out you go. Go find another tournament for nerds.
Right.
Primal Rage, on the other hand, is like, it's the baby. You want it to be as authentic as possible. It's gotta be. You gotta honor it,
So much of Primal Rage is that arcade experience, I think. So I think getting as close to a cabinet as you can, even outside of a cabinet, really adds to the gameplay.
I think so. Nothing beats, being right there next to somebody, looking at the same screen, and just kind of getting that experience. But I think that authenticity is a good segue into the next question, is the fight sticks that we use.
Yeah.
Tell us about those.
I'm quite proud of those fight sticks. I call them the Rage sticks because the Rage sticks. I did cover these in depth on another video, but I did custom build these sticks for Primal Rage. They have 4 face buttons in the same grid pattern. They have all American parts from manufacturer Industrious Lorenzo, just like it would have been back in the day. And the aluminum body came from all fight sticks. The top acrylic artwork was created in Photoshop and then printed using Focus Attack's printing service.
And didn't you say you had to smash 2 boards together to get a working one? Don't you own 3 Primal Rage boards, Tom?
I do.
Is it true?
Yeah.
The fans want to know.
Yeah. Oh, that poor board. Oh, no. But anyway, yes.
Those poor boards, you mean?
The one specifically. I'll get into that in a second. The issue with these old arcade boards is that there's always something wrong. Like, you go onto eBay and, there's listings that say that the sound is untested, the sound doesn't work, the background graphics have problems, or just won't start like at all. Now, most of the problems can be solved just by salvaging parts from other boards. Primal Rage has these sockets on the sides where you can swap out the audio amplifier if the sound isn't working right, or a second board if the graphics are kind of screwed up. So that's kind of what happened to my first board. The audio wasn't working correctly, so I got a second board. The second board didn't really have good video. So I Frankensteined the 2 of them together to make one working board. And then when I bought a third board, which came from the Arcade Expo, by the way, that one had graphics problems. So I took the board that had the audio issues and I salvaged the other board that has like all the graphics on it. And so now that first board is just kind of, well, I'm going to call it a test piece because nothing else on it works.
Tom, it's your car in the front yard, dude. That's what it is.
Yeah, it really is.
It's sitting on cinder blocks, And you're like, well, no, but what if I need something else out of it?
For real.
The leather interior,
I might need a resistor, you don't know.
So, in the realm of functional issues, one of the funniest things I think I saw when we were setting up, Tom, was that you superglued components together inside of the sticks.
Yeah.
Tell us how that went.
So, for context, when we go to the expos and we have Primal Rage out for play, people are not gentle. Okay? There's no respect.
They beat those sticks up.
Oh, it's so bad. So, things get jostled, they get broken loose, the wires come out. So I thought I had this genius idea. Why not just super glue some of this stuff together, at least temporarily, while we get through the weekend? I did not know until I did this, but Superglued does not pass electricity. In other words, if you glue wires together, that button or that joystick input will not work. I immediately had to clean it off and find another solution. So in this case, what I tried was just smash the terminals with pliers and pray. Luckily, the only thing that I had to fix after the expo was one of the joysticks was a little bit loose. So I got those tightened up and it was fine.
At least it was just that. At least your prayers were answered with your pliers. At least you did the ritual the right way.
Right.
Next up, we have a question from our co-host and opposite TO to me, Scott Whitehouse.
Yeah.
And he writes, "What's the secret to beating the system? How do I become the mystery game champion? Cheat code style."
So far as I can tell, you don't need a whole lot. Like, really, you just need one of two things. You either need to be really adaptable, because there's a lot of different kinds of games in these lists, even the fighting game list, and you just have to roll with it. Second, you need a lot of luck. We've seen button mashers take home the whole thing. We've seen upsets against favorites. But, at the end of the day, you don't need to be good at these games. You just have to play them.
Right. And I think that's kind of the glory of it. Between me and Scott, I think we have very different but very similar answers when people ask us, well, how am I supposed to win if I never know what I'm going to play? And I always tell people, believe in your heart. And Scott always tells people, don't fall in love.
Yeah, don't fall in love, baby.
Kind of catchphrases at this point.
It is.
Along with our $10,000 cash prize.
That doesn't exist, by the way.
Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. We don't have $10,000 yet.
No.
So, you and Scott were doing this, and, I came to a tournament and I was inspired enough to say, man, I think this is something I want in on. How did you guys come up with all these crazy ideas, and how do you think we got to where we are now?
It all started way back when Scott and I were doing anime nights. And this idea keeps popping up, where he said, man, we should do a mystery tournament. We should do a mystery tournament of XYZ, usually a fighting game or fighting game category. And so finally we did it. And the first tournament we did was mystery, robot fighting game. There's only 3 or 4 games in the whole tournament, but we did it.
Mystery Super Robot Fighting Tournament, I think is what it was called.
Yeah. But once we did it, we were hooked. We loved the results so much that I just ran with it. So I came back to Scott with Mystery Dreamcast Tournament, and we did that. And we loved that tournament. So we just kept going. So I got the Raspberry Pi, I threw a bunch of games on it, and the rest is history.
It's very Forrest Gump. We made it this far. Might as well keep on going.
Let's just keep going. Roy, do we have anything else?
And lastly, a special thanks to everybody who shows up to our tournaments, and an even bigger thanks to the regulars who continue to show up to our tournaments, who make it through the jank and rise to the top.
All right. Well, if you guys out there watching have more questions for me or for Roy, you can find us in the Discord pretty easily or on any of the social things. We're not that hard to find. All right. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Doodles.